At first, nobody in Galveston believed they were watching the beginning of the deadliest natural disaster in American history. It was September 8, 1900, and the morning had arrived with the strange calm that often comes before catastrophe. The island city was alive. Children were outside, shops were open, families were preparing for the weekend. Streetcars moved along the tracks, horses pulled wagons through the streets, and the Gulf of Mexico looked deceptively ordinary. For most people, it was simply another Saturday.
But offshore, a hurricane was already moving toward the Texas coast.
The storm had traveled across the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico, growing stronger as it approached. Weather information in 1900 was nothing like what we have today. There were no satellites watching the Atlantic from space. No radar screens showing the shape of the eye.
No smartphones sending emergency alerts to every resident.
And no television meteorologists explaining exactly where the storm would make landfall. Galveston had weather observers, telegraph reports, and warnings from the U.S. Weather Bureau.
That uncertainty would become deadly.
Makes sense. Galveston itself was one of the most important cities in Texas. And trials. Sitting on a barrier island just off the coast, it was a major port and commercial center.
Its streets were lined with impressive homes, businesses, churches, hotels, warehouses, and public buildings. Thousands of people lived there, and thousands more were visiting or working on the island. Yet the same geography that made Galveston a valuable port also made it extremely vulnerable. The city was remarkably flat. And beyond the city, there was the Gulf. On that Saturday morning, the first signs of danger were easy to underestimate. The wind was increasing. Waves were becoming rougher.
Rain began to fall.
Residents had experienced storms before, and hurricanes were not unknown along the Texas coast. People had learned to endure bad weather, secure windows, bring loose objects inside, and wait for the storm to pass. By morning, the Weather Bureau had issued storm warnings, but the precise danger was still not understood. The storm's track was uncertain. Some people believed Galveston would escape the worst of it.
Others assumed the island would experience another severe but survivable hurricane.
There was also a psychological problem that would prove just as important as the weather itself.
People tend to compare a new danger with the worst thing they have already survived.
If the last storm did not destroy the city, perhaps this one would not either.
That assumption can be fatal. As the hours passed, the sky darkened. Streets started filling with water. Still, life continued. The wind pushed harder against buildings. Rain began arriving in sheets. Some residents moved indoors. Families gathered together.
People looked toward the water and tried to decide whether what they were seeing was truly dangerous.
You have no radar image, no official evacuation order arriving on your phone, no highway evacuation plan.
You can only look outside and make a decision with incomplete information. And by the time the danger became obvious, leaving Galveston would already be extraordinarily difficult. The island's connection to the mainland depended heavily on bridges and rail lines.
Keep going, boy. Steady now, push through it.
Water was rising across the streets. Wind was making movement difficult. The window for escape was closing with every passing hour.
By early afternoon, Galveston was being transformed. Rainwater was accumulating rapidly. Waves were attacking the shoreline. The wind drove water inland, pushing the Gulf farther into the city.
The water was not behaving like ordinary flooding. It was coming from the sea itself.
And it was rising.
The island's low elevation meant that there was little natural protection.
There was no modern coastal barrier standing between the homes and the Gulf. Instead, the city was exposed, completely exposed. As afternoon turned toward evening, the hurricane intensified. Wind speeds were estimated to have reached extraordinary levels, although no instrument in Galveston survived to provide a perfect measurement, making it one of the most powerful hurricanes ever to strike the United States. But the number does not fully explain what it felt like.
Modern estimates generally place the hurricane in the upper range of Category 4 strength, possibly stronger.
A hurricane is not simply wind. It is wind carrying debris. It is rain that destroys visibility.
And in Galveston that day, all of those forces were converging at once.
The first buildings began to fail. Roofs were torn away. Wooden structures were battered by debris. Windows shattered. Doors were forced open. Streets disappeared beneath water.
People who had remained in their homes now faced a terrible choice. Stay inside and hope the structure survived. The safest places were usually the strongest structures, particularly substantial buildings constructed of masonry.
The danger was no longer outside the house. The danger was everywhere.
By late afternoon, the storm had become a full-scale disaster. Water surged through streets and into buildings. Furniture floated. Wooden boards became weapons. Pieces of houses were ripped loose and thrown through the darkness.
Families climbed onto upper floors, searching for higher ground in a city where there was very little of it.
For some, the attic became the last refuge. For others, it was already too late.
And then came the most horrifying realization of the entire day. The water was continuing to rise.
If you are watching stories about moments when ordinary people suddenly realize they are trapped inside a disaster, subscribe to the channel now.
As night approached, Galveston was almost unrecognizable. The city that had existed that morning.
Because this is exactly where the Galveston story becomes more than a weather event. It becomes a story about survival, fear, and impossible decisions. Because this is exactly where the Galveston story becomes more than a weather event. It becomes a story about survival, fear, and impossible decisions.
The wind howled through streets that were now filled with water and debris. Communication systems were failing. Telegraph lines went down. Transportation had become nearly impossible. The sound of collapsing buildings mixed with the roar of the ocean.
Without modern electric lighting, there were few reliable ways to see what was happening outside.
And there was another problem. Darkness.
People inside buildings could hear the destruction without knowing exactly where it was coming from.
Every crash might mean another wall had collapsed. Every wave might mean the water had risen another few inches.
Families held on to one another. Parents tried to calm children. The storm did not behave like something that would pass quickly. Hour after hour, the violence continued. The city was being struck not only by wind, but by enormous waves driven inland by the hurricane. Structures that had survived previous storms were now being battered by forces they had never been designed to withstand. Homes collapsed. Entire sections of buildings were destroyed. Debris accumulated until it became a gigantic moving mass.
And that debris made the water even more dangerous.
A middle-aged Caucasian person caught in floodwater was not simply fighting the current. They were surrounded by timber, glass, metal, furniture, and pieces of buildings.
One of the most tragic places on the island was the orphanage, operated by the Sisters of Charity of the Incarnate Word.